Good day, everyone. My name is Tanya Winders, and I am the current president of Global Allergy and Airways Patient Platform. GAP is dedicated to creating a world without allergy, asthma, and respiratory airways diseases. We are pleased that you all are joining us today for the first in our series of capacity building webinars in relation to the Global Respiratory Summit 2020. I know that 2020 has been a challenging year for so many of us with many unexpected twists and turns. And it's unfortunate that we can't be together live in person in Vienna, Austria, where we had hoped to be today for the Global Respiratory Summit. But this is an opportunity for us to come together and to address a series of topics that you as GAP members thought would be helpful in building your organization's capacity. And so again, this is the first in that capacity building series, and we'll go throughout the months of September, October, and November, and also make those available on the GAP website at gaapp.org after the presentations. So today I am the presenter, and we're going to talk about the other F word, fundraising. Sometimes we think that fundraising is a dirty word, a negative word, but today I'm going to share with you why I approach it a little bit differently, and I hope that you will again get some nuggets out of this as well that you'll be able to apply to your own organization, to the mission work that you're currently doing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the recorded session of the other F word, fundraising fundamentals. First, the reality. Sorry, everyone. Need to go back one slide. Okay, I'm not sure why that first slide is not playing. So we will just start with slide 2. First, the reality is money makes the world go round. You simply cannot accomplish your mission, your organization's mission, without money. It's important that we begin to think about money in a different way. And as we go throughout our time today, I'm going to share 3 key points that I think help guide and make us all more comfortable with addressing fundraising and with asking for money. But I think we also need to reframe this in our own mind. It's not that you need money. It's truly that you are providing an opportunity for the donor or for the industry partner or for the funder to provide and to seek out an opportunity that aligns with their aims, with their goals, and provides mutual benefit. So think about it a little bit differently. It's not that you're coming from a position of need or want or desperation, but instead you're coming with an opportunity that allows them to get involved and to change the world. So money is not a dirty word. Need is probably a word we want to avoid, and we want to seek more towards the language of opportunity. So as we go throughout our time, we're going to talk about, number 1, what are our individual feelings about money? Because believe it or not, that defines oftentimes how we go about asking for money and how we go about fundraising. Secondly, we're going to talk about the fact that people give to people, not to nebulous causes. So sometimes we think, oh, we've got a great mission, or our organization has a long history, and so people should just give to us because it's the right thing to do. Well, we're going to learn that that's simply not the case, that people give to people, not causes. And then finally, we're going to learn the importance of making the ask. Sometimes we can do all of the front end work and definitely have a wonderful case for support, but we don't close the deal. And so we have to learn to consistently make the ask. So why listen to me? I have been leading Allergy and Asthma Network for the last 8 years and have been leading at GAP for a little over 4 years. And I think that this slide clearly demonstrates why I believe that I have something to share when it comes to fundraising. Allergy and Asthma Network in 2012, when I joined the organization, was less than $1 million in annual revenues, even though they were a 28-year-old organization. In just a couple of short years, by 2014, we had grown to over $3 million in annual revenues, and this year in 2020 will exceed $5 million in revenues. What about at GAP? In 2016, when I came into the organization, late 2016, the revenues had been less than $100,000 a year. By 2018, we had grown to around $500,000 in revenues a year. And this year in 2020, even in light of a global pandemic, we'll finish out the year with close to $1 million revenues. So again, this is substantial growth in both of the two nonprofit organizations that I am the primary fundraiser, and really doing this work day in, day out of partnering with individual donors as well as with corporate donors and with government funders. So we're going to talk about all of those different types of funding sources and also talk about how we do a more effective job at securing the funds that we need to advance our mission. So let's start off thinking about what are your feelings about money. The reality is we all come to the table with financial baggage. If you grew up poor, then you have emotions and feelings about money and the need for money. If you grew up rich or privileged, then you have different emotions and feelings about money. If perhaps you've been jealous of people who had more money, then that can influence your interactions when you're conducting fundraising activity. And what about if you are of wealth and you feel guilty because you have an abundance or because you have that wealth? So there are many different emotions and feelings that surround people when we talk about money. Some people think that just because you earn more money, it means that you're smarter. Some people have the opposite perception, that if you don't earn as much money, then you're not as smart. But the reality is that the truth of the matter, the bottom line, people are people. And rich people simply have more money. It doesn't mean that they are different from you or I. The only difference is the resources that they have at their disposal. So it's important for each of us to deal with our own baggage about our beliefs of money. And we have to remember, when we go into these fundraising discussions, you're not asking for yourself. I mean, you're not asking anyone to pay your own mortgage or your electric bill this month or your car note. You are simply asking to match their desire and their interest with the organization's interest and mission, and create those win-win, mutually beneficial relationships. Remember, you are giving the donor truly an opportunity to invest in changing the world. And there are some key words, like we talked about before, versus saying need, you can talk about opportunities. When you talk about giving, you can talk in the term of investing. Investing senses that you're getting something back in return, rather than just giving and never getting anything in return. And there are a lot of intrinsic reasons why people give. It's not always as evident as just the tax donation or deduction or the altruistic feeling that they may get for donating to your cause. Secondly, remember, people give to people, not causes. Oftentimes, we fail to realize that in the nonprofit space, the revenues are over $300 billion per year. And greater than 70% of that actually comes from individuals. And so the reality of that is that we have to build one-on-one relationships with people, with individuals. We have to recognize that people connect on a personal level, and that they end up opening their wallets or their purse strings or writing the check because they like you as a person, as the fundraiser. People give to people, not solely to causes. Now, how do we begin to build those relationships? It is by listening. Remember, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. And the only way that we can truly build a relationship is by focusing in on what matters most to that person. We have to value what they value. How do we learn that? It's by asking effective questions and by listening at least 75% of the time. It's also important to come to the table after having conducted key research. So look into wealth assessments, look into property records, previous charitable gifts. There are so many sources of information that you can find what's really important to that particular person just by doing a little bit of homework beforehand. We'll talk more when we get into the industry relationships about how to do that for those stakeholders, but this is really in relation to individual donors or to major donors. Knowing what their interests are and how to align, again, your work, your mission to those interests gives you a much greater choice and opportunity to partner together to build that mutually beneficial relationship over time. Next, don't forget to make the ask. You can build your case for support. What is the unmet need? You need to find a way to articulate that clearly and concisely, but you also need to create a sense of urgency around that need. Why is it important for them to give today at this particular point in time? Also, in that case for support, how would your organization or you address that need? And how would you do that better than other alternatives? So a perfect example of this is a current project that we have at Allergy and Asthma Network focused on reducing disparities in respiratory disease and COVID. We know that there is great unmet need in the African American community, and we know that in relation to the African American community in the US, many of them have had very poor access to COVID testing. And so we designed a program, our Not One More Life program, that creates a sense of urgency for access to COVID testing, COVID screening, as well as asthma and COPD screening. And so it's identifying that need and creating that sense of urgency. But then when we got to how do we address that need and how is it different or better than others, it really was through, in our case, partnering with African American churches. And so we knew that we had these key relationships in that community that we could go forth and partner together to actually deploy resources for screening and testing in the local community. And then following up and doing other activities of education and driving awareness in that community after the live events. So after you find the need, create the sense of urgency, and share with them how you would address that need, then it comes time to demonstrate how they can actually get involved. How can they help address that need? Maybe that's money, perhaps it's time, perhaps it's other talents or resources. There are many ways that people can get involved and help, but outlining that clearly and having the benefits of meeting that need as a very evident ask is really important in the case for support. It's also important sometimes to point out the negative repercussions if that unmet need is not addressed. So if, for example, in the example I shared earlier, if we are not meeting the unmet need in the African American community, that it has underlying respiratory disease, then they will have higher burden, they will have greater morbidity and mortality due to the current pandemic. And they'll feel more disenfranchised. And again, that social injustice that's evident will continue to be exacerbated and really manifested in the local community. So it's by pointing out both the benefits of meeting the need, but also perhaps the negative repercussions of the unmet need that leads you then to making the ask. So when we actually get to making the ask, what are the words that we use? I often use the words, would you consider giving? Would you consider helping? Would you consider donating? And so I frame it in that way, and I have an ask in mind. So would you consider supporting this cause with $100,000 for a large ask? Would you consider donating $100 per month to support this effort? Whatever that ask is, you have to make sure that it's appropriate for the person or the source that you're asking, but don't be afraid to ask. And then if they say no, and they may well do so, then the next thing is to say, well, what would you consider? So if you wouldn't consider giving $100,000 to support this effort, what would you consider? And that opens the door and allows you to have a second ask, but then they can better define what those parameters are. So don't forget those keywords. What would you consider? Would you consider with a specific amount? And then secondly, what would you consider as a follow-up? The bottom line is this: if you don't ask, you will not receive. You shall not receive. So we can go back to the good book. And again, this is a reference, but if you don't ask, you won't receive it. So you must ask. And I know that takes courage. I know for some people that's uncomfortable, but it's vitally important if you're going to move your organization and your mission forward. So how do we tell our stories? How can we optimize different channels in telling our story impactfully? At Allergy and Asthma Network, as well as at GAP, we've developed a number of different videos, patient testimonies, like why I give, why I support the network, why I'm involved. We do those from individual donors as well as from corporate donors and others. Of course, we can tell our stories across all of our social media platforms. We can utilize those social media platforms like Facebook Fundraiser, Amazon Smiles, or Giving Tuesday initiatives. There are many different ways that you can ask your community to get involved and to support the mission. Email marketing is an important, effective channel that you can activate for fundraising. It's important to recognize that there are some industry benchmarks around open rates, click-through rates, and unsubscribe rates. And don't forget that more than 80% of all users are actually reading your email on their mobile device. So any communication you send out must be mobile friendly. But, when we started really actively doing email marketing, it took me some time because I was surprised, and I didn't know how to judge if we were doing it well or getting good results. So if you have an open rate of greater than 20% and a click-through rate of greater than 8%, then you are above those industry averages. Now, what about major donors? And what is a major donor? At Allergy and Asthma Network, we define major donors as anyone who gives more than $1,000 per year. And again, as a national organization that's been around for 35 years, we still don't have a very large number of these. We don't have a significant number of major donors. But there is a very specific 6-step approach, a 6-step model to identifying and engaging major donors that's outlined here. So the first one is to identify those people in your database, in your circle of influence, that could potentially give more than $1,000 a year. And then qualify those individuals for how you would rank them or prioritize them regarding the engagement and how you build the relationship effectively. Actually put together a plan. So do your homework, do your research, get maybe your top 10 or 20 that you're going to try to cultivate the relationship with over the course of a year. And then do that. Cultivate that relationship over the course of a 12-month period with a clear plan. So have a monthly activity that you've designed specifically to engage that stakeholder. And perhaps that is a video one month, a testimonial another, an email another. There are many different ways that you can do that, as are outlined here, but it's important to have that plan and stick to that plan over the course of a year before ever necessarily pushing for the ask. It's only after we cultivate those relationships that we can then deserve to move on to the actual ask. That can be done in a one-on-one visit. It certainly can also be done in direct mail and email and other formats. But oftentimes with major donors, it's that one-on-one ask to align a program or a project specifically with their interest that's going to move them towards making those larger donations. And then step 5 is negotiate and close. Again, that's the would you consider and what would you consider. Sometimes that's the negotiation and the balance that goes back and forth between you and a donor. And then finally, be sure and always, always, always thank the donor for their gift, for their donation and their investment into the mission and the organization, and then begin the planning for the next funding cycle. So again, you see that there are other ways, such as direct mail. Again, industry average is that about 5% of nonprofit donations come from direct mail. So it is a very low percentage of direct mail that actually funds the mission and the work for most organizations. But if it's something that works with your community, we encourage you to do so. Maybe it's events like walks, galas, silent auctions, online auctions. There are a lot of different event-based fundraisers. Of course, in COVID and during the context of the pandemic, that's been more challenging. So many of those things have had to move to virtual events. And again, we've got some wonderful examples of really creative, innovative ways that people have continued to do fundraising via events. And don't forget about planned giving. So this is, again, a very specific segment of your community who typically has the ability in their will or their estate planning to actually allocate a portion of that estate to your organization. And we've been fortunate in having 1 or 2 of these over the course of the last 7 or 8 years that definitely have helped to create an endowment and a greater reserve to move the mission forward long term and to honor the life of and legacy of the person who set up that planned giving. The reality is you're not going to have the same ask for everyone. Timing matters. And so having a plan around the way that you will approach your ask at different times of year for different purposes is really important. Sometimes we do what's called a team impact appeal at the beginning of the year. It's where we reflect and say what we had hoped to accomplish, what we did accomplish, some of the strategies that we used to do that, the progress, and then the unique capabilities that our organization has demonstrated through that actual impact project. And by crafting these short, what we call cases for support, it does help you to get more succinct in your communications and, again, appeal to the emotional level of a donor who is connecting to that cause. So don't be afraid to tell impactful stories that have emotion, but also demonstrate and have the evidence that your organization will come through and perform and help meet the unmet need that was outlined. Also, in that ask array, provide different ways to give. Perhaps that's a monthly pledge. Maybe it's giving to a special project or giving just to the general operating funds. Many organizations that we talk with and work with simply don't have that sustained funding model. And so think about different ways that people can get involved and people can give. Also, offer different amounts. We often say, you know, a starting gift of $25 or $50, and then give them various amounts of 100, 250, 500, or 1,000. Again, offer some level for everyone to get in. In our 35th anniversary, it was, you know, $1, $10, or $100 for each year that the organization has been in existence, that we ask people to donate. And then that storytelling appeal. Again, sometimes you get these just really impactful stories of the way your organization has changed a patient's life. And so capture those, whether it be in a short video, whether it be in a written testimony, but capture that, share that story broadly throughout your community. And then about 3 weeks later, do a little, what we call echo appeal or follow-up appeal that builds on that. Don't believe that just because you send it out once, that everyone in your network saw it or was able to respond to it. So that's the whole idea around an echo appeal, is you send it out once and then about 2 to 3 weeks later you send it out again with a follow-up. Also, don't forget those important day appeals. So we have opportunities like World Lung Day, World Asthma Day, World COPD Day, Rare Disease Day. All of those things are opportunities to send out a specific appeal. And then hopefully you all are preparing annual reports that you know, synthesize and kind of bring together all of the work that your organization is doing year over year. But when you complete that annual report, are you sending it out electronically and perhaps even direct mail to some donors and using it as an opportunity to create that ask again of continuing to fund those projects, continuing to advance the mission and the work of your organization? And then also offer different reply devices. So different strokes for different folks, different amounts, different ways to give, and different ways to give. So that can be, again, text to give is a very innovative approach that actually many churches now are getting over 50% of their donations from text to give campaigns. We can ask people to mail in their donation. We can ask them to set up recurring monthly gifts or annual gifts. And of course, we can also take donations over the phone. But think about different ways, because the reality is that different subsets of our patient communities and of our funders are going to want to donate in different fashions. So I want to spend just the next 5 or 10 minutes talking a bit about industry partners, and also mentioning a bit about the board engagement in fundraising. When it comes to industry partners, it's very important as you work with pharmaceutical, medical device, or other consumer product organizations to know the rules of the road. The reality is that most industry partners exist to advance the science and to help patients access treatments. But there are legal and ethical restrictions of how they can engage. And so it's important to realize that oftentimes the relationships with these industry partners are not product specific, but they do have to create mutually beneficial win-win partnerships. So we can focus on things like disease awareness, education, advocacy, access to treatment, policy, those types of things, and research. These are 4 key areas that most industry partners have an interest and a willingness to support. Again, when we're talking about this, remember, not product specific. So if you're in a specific therapeutic area, like talking about COPD or asthma, then that is fine to talk about the disease and its awareness and education around the disease without going specifically into a single treatment. And then also we have to remember that oftentimes there are restrictions or regulatory requirements for transparency and for making sure that we are following those rules of the road, and also some ethical considerations. So I always think about, is this an organization that aligns with the network or GAP's core values? Are they respectful? Do they treat us as partners in equity? Do they demonstrate integrity? Do they allow us to operate in independence? And again, is there that transparency and that willingness to work together and to share when, in fact, they may be crossing the line of pushing too far? We also have a rule that we won't accept more than 25% of our total budget from a single source. And this helps to make sure that there isn't one organization, one industry partner that is exerting too much influence or control over the budget of the network. I always say it basically comes down to that, to remember that the dog wags the tail, not the tail wagging the dog. It's not that industry comes to us and says, oh, I have this money and I want to do this project. It should be that we are having ongoing conversation about what's important to them and what's important to us and how we can work together. And so your mission should not change just because of the way in which a funding source changes. It's also important to think about, is it a single funder program or a multi-funder program? In some cases, I know in some of our European countries, our members prefer not to work in any single funded programs. At the network, we have done some single funder programs, as we have at GAP from time to time, but we do prefer operating under a multi-funder program. And that's where we've got at least 2 or 3 companies coming together and supporting the same overall awareness, education, advocacy, or research project. And then remember that when you are dealing with industry partners and with these more formal relationships, that it does require more time, and it also requires more formality when it comes to proposals and contracts. So you're going to have to dedicate resources to developing those proposals. Those cases for support will be much more time consuming in creating those and communicating those. And then also you're going to have to enter into formal contractual arrangements with the funder for those larger amounts of money. And again, those oftentimes just outline exactly who's responsible for what and how the 2 organizations will be working together. So the other thing I would say here is around a couple of notes around board engagement, because one of the ways that we have grown our budget is by working and growing our board and changing the expectation of our board of directors. When I came to the network, our board of directors did not facilitate introductions to industry partners. They did not necessarily give to the organization consistently. There wasn't that expectation of supporting financially. And we've spent a lot of time and years discussing this as a board. And last year we did implement, and actually it was in 2018, a give-get policy. And I can share this with you all if you're interested, but it basically outlines that the board, each board member is asked to give or get equitably $2,500 per year in donations to the organization. Now, that can be that they themselves write a check for $2,500, or it can be that they connect us with other donors, or they can host an event in their home or in their hometown. It also can be, though, what we call a time, talent, or treasure model. Time could be that they donate X number of hours to the organization to reach that goal. Talent could be that perhaps we've got a CPA and he donates his talents and his ability to support us through our auditing process each year. The treasures is typically, again, those financial resources. But we had decided in our board to have a goal of $2,500 per year. It is not a requirement. We've never asked anyone to step off the board if they don't meet that goal, but we do have that expectation and we talk about it openly. So it's a give-get policy that supports a time, talent, treasure model for board engagement. It also has helped us to retain more donors by engaging the board in this way. Surprisingly, it's only 46% of donors who come back year after year after year to an organization. And that's the universal number in surveys of nonprofit giving. So we need to have different approaches for new donors, for lapsed donors, for existing donors, and for prospecting new donors. So having those variety of approaches and really focusing on donor retention over time is a very important element of continuing to build your fundraising strategy. So as we come to the end of the formal presentation, our time together before we open it up to Q&A, I want to just reinforce, think about what your individual feelings are about money and deal with your own baggage. Don't let your own personal history cloud your perspective or your view on how to go about raising money for your missions organization. Remember, you're not asking for you, you're asking for the opportunity for them to invest and to actually accomplish your organization's mission more effectively. Remember, people give to people. They don't give to nebulous causes. So it's not enough to just have a vision, a mission, and a few nice values on the wall. We have to connect with people, build relationships, learn what they value, and then match the offerings and the opportunities within our organization to their individual interest. And then again, don't forget, at the end of the day, we have to ask. We must make the ask for the financial commitment and support of the organization. There is absolutely no way that we can end the needless death and suffering due to allergies, asthma, and related conditions throughout the United States without money. And I unashamedly never hesitate to ask for money for the mission and the cause of the network. Likewise, if we are going to create a world without allergy, asthma, respiratory disease, without COVID, there is no way to do that without money and resources. And so I believe that really becoming an effective fundraiser and turning the F word of fundraising into no longer a dirty word, but to a positive word, is by always remembering the heart of why you do what you do. It's not the what people give, it's the why that they give. So start with that why, remind them of that why, and always conclude with that why, of why we do what we do. And if you do that, I promise you that fundraising won't be that dirty word, the dirty F word. It'll be a positive F word, and your fundraising efforts will be wildly successful. Now we'll conclude and we'll go to the open Q&A session. Great. I hope that you guys enjoyed that and that you got a lot out of it. As I shared some of the basic fundamental issues around creating a fund development plan. This is an approach that I personally have taken at Allergy and Asthma Network over the last 8 years, and have also done in my volunteer role as the president of GAP over the last 3 or 4 years. So at this point, I'll open it up if you guys have any questions, if I can field any specific request, then I'll be happy to do so. And I do have about a 10-minute video about that disparities project that, if time allows or if anyone would like to see, we can also make that available here at the conclusion to show you how I build that case for support and articulate clearly the types of projects and programs the network is embarking on. So at this time, I'll open it up for any questions or answers. Remember, your line it may be muted, so unmute your line or put your questions in the chat box. Any current questions? All right, well, I guess I'll pose a question. So what is the greatest challenge that each of you has in beginning your fundraising efforts or in continuing your fundraising efforts, especially in light of COVID? What's some of the challenges that you've encountered this year? And remember, your lines are on mute. You will have to unmute your line if you wish to speak. Nobody's speaking up today. Everybody's being very quiet on the line. Okay.
Oh, hooray, I did it, yeah?
Yes, yes. Hi, Otto.
My question is, so we are very industry focused, especially pharmaceutical industry focused. And the problem, so we have as organization is to get in contact with the non-pharmaceutical industry, yeah? We made a lot of contacts, but so the right message is missing, yeah, I would believe, yeah. Is it for banks? Is it for insurance companies? Yeah, or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so great question. One of the things that we have begun doing is actually looking into foundations, and there are certain programs like a organization called Foundation Search, where you can put in a few keywords and it matches you with corporate foundations that are funding work in that space. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Foundation Search or some of those automated tools that help you to identify those potential other industry partners beyond pharma, then certainly we can follow up and provide some of those resources for you afterward. But we've found that corporate foundations tend to be a good arm to begin to build a relationship and secure some funding from industry beyond the traditional healthcare industry that we engage. I'm going to unmute everyone's line at this point so that anyone can speak if you wish. So if anyone else has a question or a comment, please feel free to do so. Okay.
Okay, Tonya, hi, this is Gundula.
You know what?
I would like to know if when you ask for money, and you don't know yet if it will be a single sponsoring or multi-sponsoring, for how much money do you ask when you know the project costs?
Right. So that's a very great question. When I am typically building out a project or a proposal, I'll put together a draft budget. And when I do put the proposal out for funders to consider, I do give them that overall budget. Sometimes I don't even ask for a specific amount. I do indicate that we are seeking multiple funders and that this is the total project budget for consideration. But I do not ask for a specific amount because I want them to go and really look at what if they were the only funder. And sometimes you just simply do not know. Now, if I know that I have a secured funder for a specific amount, then I tend to go to that second funder and ask them for an equal amount so that there is equity in those multi-funded projects.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Other questions?
How long do you wait if a funder tells you that he might be interested, but he has to go back and ask the internal colleagues? How long do you wait until you contact him again?
That's a really great question. So I tend to give it about a week to 10 days and then circle back and just say, checking in, any news, enjoyed our conversation, wondering if you had any further questions or if your internal colleagues had, indicated if they were interested in the project. But about a week to 2 days is an appropriate follow-up time, I think.
Thank you.
A following question to this. Normally, the budgets in industry will be built in mid of the year or early autumn.
Yes.
Is this the same in US or have you other cycles?
Yes, it's a great question and very important point, Otto. So again, when you're talking about industry specifically, most of them go on a pretty routine cycle whereby they have their fiscal year and they do planning in the last quarter of that fiscal year for the upcoming fiscal year. So this is the time. September, October is prime time for those that are on a calendar year to begin discussions about the upcoming year. So we are already engaging all of our industry partners in those conversations in September and October because they will then make the plea internally to secure those budget dollars. And I typically find that it's November, December when they know that they'll have a budget amount that they can then fund in the coming year. Now, interestingly enough, things have changed even in this year, whereby it seemed like people weren't really committing the dollars early in the year, that it was more around the March, April, and even into May timeframe before they were releasing some of those funds. And I think that was also in part due to the pandemic and the slowing of sales overall. And so people were somewhat holding on to their funds and being a little bit more conservative in their approach at the beginning of 2020. And that may be the case in 2021 as well, given that there's still a high level of uncertainty. But having those conversations early in that fall period planning is really important. So great question. Armando, did you have a question?
Yeah, hello, Sally. Hello, everybody. Thank you. I like it a lot, the presentation, very clear with the important, the key points. So my question is, here in Europe, most of the patients associations are very small. They are so small that we have problems to involve in our team professional staff. I mean, professional people that can help the association to plan strategic plans for funding or for projects or everything, no? So they cannot do this because they don't have money, they don't have cash. But at the end, they don't have cash because they don't have professional staff. So in your experience, what is the recommendation to start really to convince the associations that they have to change this way of thinking?
Yes, so Armando, that is a $1 million question, because definitely it becomes sort of this cart before the horse or chicken and egg type of discussion, right? How do we invest to bring in more resources? And I would say first and foremost that, if you have someone who is a people person, who's passionate about the mission and the work that you're doing, and can clearly articulate the key mission and work of the organization, that's a person that I would invest in getting some basic fundraising training and helping them to go out and start that process. We also have partnered with universities and with masters in public health programs and things like that for support in grant writing and also in the development of some of our programs and resources. So it doesn't always have to be a paid internship. It can be, a free intern program with a university student who can provide some of those much needed skills and experiences to help advance the mission of the organization forward. But I would say this, and I've had this conversation with my board. It is part of the board's responsibility to create financial sustainability for the organization. So if you don't have a board who's doing that, you certainly need to consider how to evolve your board and change the makeup of the board to reflect that, because that is part of their fiscal responsibility as a board member. Number two, I think that what we found is that if you can start out by securing small grants, even like very small regional grants, and demonstrate success, that then it oftentimes leads to a bigger grant down the road. And so the grant I was talking about, the Not One More Life project, it's starting in Atlanta on a very small scale. Originally, the project, was supposed to be just in Atlanta, just for one day, one screening, one church. And then all of a sudden it's blossomed into a 4-month project with over 1,000 patients involved, and with the promise from the funders that if we're successful in Atlanta, that we'll then replicate that in about 10 cities across the US in 2021. So it's that momentum and getting some little wins and smaller grants that I think you can leverage into larger options.
Yeah. Thank you.
We've got just a few more minutes. If there's any other questions, I think what I'll do is just make the Not One More Life project available, the video with the voiceover available for you all after. We'll send it out and also make it available as a resource in coordination with this particular webinar. But what I would say is your case for support doesn't always have to be a written proposal. I put together 10 slides and did a 10-minute voiceover PowerPoint for this project, and we ended up securing $1.2 million. So, think about creative ways and also think about how you like to digest information. And if you prefer video, so likely will your funders. And definitely across social and digital channels, that is the way to go, is moving more and more towards video. Okay. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, then again, I just want to thank you all for your participation today. I want to encourage you to continue to participate in our capacity building webinar series over the course of the next several weeks and months. And also, please don't forget to join us on September 10th for the Global Respiratory Summit virtual meeting, the 3-hour meeting that day. We are looking forward to having everyone together. And again, sorry that we can't be together in Austria, but certainly looking forward to gathering online and celebrating at the Global Respiratory Summit 2020. So continue to take care, stay well, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.